what does it mean to restore humanity to education? It almost, I think people see that, and it's a little bit of a Rorschach test in the sense that they sense that something is missing from there, right? And they fill it in with that thing that sense that they have that like schools aren't meeting this deep human desire or they're not focused on these things. And then what we can end up doing then is connecting that with like, well, let's talk about the ways in which schools aren't responsive to, the human beings within them, and what does it mean to restore humanity to education? Because I think we've seen that schools can really be dehumanizing places.
Welcome to Rethinking Education. Education's critical friend.
Nick Covington, welcome to the Rethinking Education podcast.
Thanks so much, Kate and James, for hosting me.
Yeah, it's great to be here. And as you can see, yes, as you've been mentioned, we have Kate McAllister here as our guest, sort of like like half co-host and half co-guest here, because I think that this is probably going to be a bit of a three-way conversation. I'm appreciating the Ozzy Osbourne tribute in your t-shirt there. It's being recorded shortly after his sad passing, but his spirit lives on, does it not?
Yeah, and his funeral was today. My daughter and I watched the procession live this morning.
Really?
They're in Birmingham. Very emotional, really striking. The funeral procession was almost like New Orleans style. They had a band playing like trumpets, trombones, like marching band style, playing Iron Man, playing Crazy Train as that went by, and they've got the Black Sabbath bridge there in Birmingham
Mm.
just chock full of memorials and everything else. And the procession stopped. Sharon, Jack, Kelly, the whole family got out. Real emotional scene. Thousands of people, I would say, along the street. Yeah, I just, what a thing to say about Ozzy that just what 3 weeks ago, getting the gang back together for
Right. How
one last
beautiful was that?
show.
Yeah.
Oh, I know, man. Going out on top, like truly just legendary. Like I loved seeing that. And then of course his passing just shortly after. So I'm a huge, Sabbath fan and of the music that he's inspired. So yeah,
Right.
it was really emotional, his passing. So yeah, props to Ozzy and Sabbath.
Props to Ozzy. Isn't it mad, like how much that means to people? Something that would have originally been seen as something that was like demonic and so sort of counter civilization, like subcultural, and but it just speaks to the animal in people, and they turn out in their thousands to support it.
Yeah. And again,
Incredible.
just the nicest guy. And hey, quick
Yeah.
Iowa connection, because I'm coming from Iowa. The
Right.
incident where he bit the head off the bat on stage happened here, in Des Moines,
Really, was
Iowa.
it?
So yeah, there's connections everywhere. And I think, yeah, just like I'm so I guess fortunate, thankful for like that community, of heavy metal and things that he's inspired. So what a wild time to say that we've all been alive at like the inception of an entire music genre that's owed to a handful of dudes from Birmingham, UK,
Right.
banging on a few instruments there in the 70s. Just crazy stuff.
Yes, really interesting. What a claim to fame. Let's get into this conversation about your work. I'm really interested to just spend the whole time. And thank you so much for having me on your pod recently to talk about the work that we've been doing. Really want to just take a deep dive into the Human Restoration Project. So for anybody who's coming to this cold, who hasn't come across your work before, could you please just start by just giving us like a brief intro, the standard thing that you do at the start of a conversation such as this, like your career history, what you've been doing up until now, and what you're doing now.
Yeah, it has been honestly like a wild adventure. Like a lot of the connections. I mean, Kate, you were explaining before we hit record about, the connection, your connection to HRP through Twitter. James, I'm sure, I don't remember the genesis of our relationship, but probably very similar in that regard.
Mm.
I met Chris McNutt on Twitter during like the golden age of edu Twitter back in the 20 teens, when I was active on there and when I was a high school history teacher. We connected there and just found that we were basically like the same person, interested in a lot of the same ideas. And it was a lot, again, like Kate, you setting off on this global adventure. We were able to crowdfund our nonprofit paperwork in early spring 2020 um, and get that submitted. So, we became an official nonprofit with Human Restoration Project in 2020, and just, wanted to really bring the ideas of progressive education that so impacted our own classroom practice, and connecting to a community of progressive educators online as well. And finding there really wasn't a central place for all of us to get together, organize these ideas around, to
Mm.
share like research-based practices in progressive education and share what was working and what wasn't in our classrooms, and the impact on kids, and wanting to turn HRP into that hub through podcasts, writings. We now have a Discord community that's really thriving since the kind of the fall of Twitter and the collapse of those centralized communities. But then our work kind of post-pandemic, if that's what we can call it here, with schools proper has really taken off since about 2021, 2022. Our work now really involves starting with focus groups and listening to kids, triangulating sort of the needs, the interests, the desires of students, teachers, and community, and using that as a jumping off point to like drive grassroots school-based change. So, in the United States, as I'm sure in the UK, a lot of it is like top down, particularly from state levels here in the United States. But also, No Child Left Behind has a huge shape on that. ESSA had a huge, influence. Race to the Top did as well. And, I think we saw that now we live in the shadow of all of those things. And this is really attempt to just rehumanize, from the ground up, what schools should even be about in the first place, right? What should schools be doing? What's their purpose? How do we align all those things systemically? And for us, we think that that begins by talking with and taking seriously, the concerns, the issues, the desires of the people that those systems serve. So again, talking to kids, parents, and staff members about, what is it that we should be doing more of? What is it that we should be doing less of? To continue that journey, we were able to apply for a U.S. Department of Education grant, which we did back in 2023, not knowing what the future held. But we got that grant. It's an education, innovation, and research grant. And these are grants that are primarily designed to serve marginalized, at risk, whatever kind of label you want to serve them on, communities that haven't really had the resources to be served by these alternative programs. And so we partnered with some districts in Western Michigan and their schools there based on the data that they had. We partnered with, at the time, the University of Virginia, and now that's RAND is our evaluating body, and ourselves to actually launch some project-based learning school within a school models for a couple of middle schools in Western Michigan. And by the end of this 5 years, we're headed into year two properly here. We will have served across two different districts and two different schools, sixth, seventh, and eighth graders. So cohorts of 100 kids and 4 teachers a pop. So if you kind of do the math, by the end of year 5, we'll be running a cohort that has 600 kids in it across 6 different grade levels in 2 different districts, and a huge cohort of teachers just doing interdisciplinary project-based learning built around feedback-driven, portfolio-based assessments, and a real emphasis on stewardship and community resilience and those restorative practices as well. So it's been really interesting, post-pandemic. We had that conversation, James, about what that looks like in the UK, but to see how schools are really being responsive here in the United States to the new needs that they're seeing come up, and seeing progressive education as really an answer to that.
Right. Yeah, really interesting. I've got so many questions that I want to ask you about that project. But first, let's bring in Kate. So Kate has been on this podcast before, but it's been quite a while. And so can I ask you the same question, Kate, just to introduce yourself to our listeners and just to let them know about the work that you've done up until this point? You don't need to cover the work that you and I have done together, but especially the stuff that you're doing in the DR, in the Dominican Republic.
Sure. Thank you for having me again. And it's nice to meet you, Nick. So I'm a teacher by trade. I did work with James for a long time, and I now live in the Dominican Republic. I have an education center that is called the Hive. It's part of a bigger organization called the Human Hive. And it's really my experiment, my sandpit that I want to play in. Because we'd had this conversation many times, if we could start again from zero, if you could start again from first principles, and if you really wanted to put something together that would support young people to grow up knowing how to look after themselves, how to look after other people, the people that they care about, and how to look after everything in their environment, what would you do? What would it look like? And it turns out it wouldn't look very much at all like the education model that I grew up in, that you grew up in, and that we still have. And very similar to Nick, it's based in asking nearly every day, how do we feel this morning? What do we want to achieve? Do we have everything we need in order to achieve that? If we don't, who do we need to ask? What do we need to get? What do we need to do? Or do we need to change the thing that we were planning to achieve in order to meet what we do have and the mood that we're in and the energy that we have and all of those things? So it's a really responsive model for learning that is rooted in community, rooted in the kind of collective energy of who you're with and what you're trying to achieve. And I've been doing that for 5 years now. And so I've learned a lot along the way. Some of my ideas have stuck and stayed, some have changed. Meeting really, really fascinating, interesting people who are also playing around with the same ideas. You know, if we could do it better, that there is a collective will to do it better. And that's part of why I wanted to be here and just reconnect or connect properly to Nick, because knowing that there are other people alongside on a similar journey, doing similar work, because it's really like, if you're really passionate about something in the way I am, you kind of drop into your groove and you end up out on a limb, and it's quite a lonely place to be. And it's lonely out there. So it's nice to know that there are other people doing similar things that I can learn from and that I can share with. And so that's why I muscled my way in here today, so that I can have this conversation with you together.
Yes. So there's lots of parallels between all of our work, I think. And so let's just like roll this back to just like semantics and just talk about the name a little. So where did the name come from, the Human Restoration Project? Why human? What is it that you're trying to restore, as it were?
God, that's a great question. That honestly would be a better question for Chris, because he already had that name floating around. You
Okay.
know, it's like asking, I'm sure that the genesis of like the name Black Sabbath, I think it comes from like the old horror movie, but I don't know specifically where the name came from. I know at the time we were leaning a lot into like sci-fi futurism aesthetics,
Mm.
sort of as I don't know, like a visionary, kind of treating it like a visionary, a subversive visionary sci-fi project a little bit, aesthetically, which was really cool, right? I think it drew a lot of people into it at first, just think, what is this human restoration project? The name today, even, if we set up booths at education conferences and things, people stop and just ask, like, what is this about? Because the
Yeah.
name is so striking.
Yeah.
But really, like, what does it mean to restore humanity to education? It almost I think people see that, and it's a little bit of a Rorschach test in the sense that they sense that something is missing from there, right? And they fill it in with that thing that sense that they have, that like schools aren't meeting this deep human desire, or they're not focused on these things. And then what we can end up doing then is connecting that with like, well, let's talk about the ways in which schools aren't responsive to, the human beings within them, and what does it mean to restore humanity to education? Because I think we've seen that schools can really be dehumanizing places. They can be places that really replicate a lot of the inequalities and carceral, ideas of the rest of society and the rest of the world, depending on your context. And we believe, in our progressive lineage, going back to like John Dewey, the critical heritage through Paulo Freire and beyond, that right schools in their relationship to society both shape and then are shaped by it at the same time. So believing very strongly in that dialogue and discourse, and schools as a microcosm of society, as a lab for democracy, in the Deweyan sense, places where we can really build new models of society and then, right, change the expectations for students and communities in the world outside of school. So, what does that look like? Breaking down the walls of school, inviting in communities, sending students out into communities, breaking down the barriers between disciplines, doing a lot of interdisciplinary learning, a real emphasis on experiential, hands-on, call it project, problem, place, whatever based educations you're working with there, leaning into those models.
Mm.
And then just aligning assessment too, alongside, how we know human beings, not only learn, but how they feel about what they learn, the messages that grades communicate, and how we can align those things differently too. So yeah, could I give a quick example, James, from one of the schools that we're working with, like what
Please
this
do,
looks
yeah.
like? So the school that we partnered with at first for this big grant project, their frustration was that like over, the years, basically flatlining test scores and this other problem, they got this Gallup data, Gallup, the American, polling company,
Yeah.
and Gallup used to, I don't know if they still do, but at least at the time they did this big student poll, so schools could sign up to have this big poll done. And it was called Engage Today, Ready for Tomorrow. And I just have the results from 2023 pulled up, which is kind of when we began this partnership. And they looked at these three elements, that to me don't exactly ring with like align with content, right? There's not a path towards these things through like teaching math more or better or science or whatever. But they specifically polled about engagement, right? Involvement and enthusiasm for school, hope, the ideas and energy that students have for the future, belonging, so feeling accepted and included as part of school, and then social emotional learning, that is how you learn to understand and manage emotions and establish positive relationships with others. And I'll just share with you here real quick. At the time, their engagement data, only 27% of students were engaged, and the other, you do the math, the other 73% were either not engaged. Half of kids were actively disengaged, 47% actively disengaged. As far as hope, only 44% felt hopeful, 17% felt stuck, 39%, these are middle schoolers, sixth, seventh, and eighth graders in the US, were discouraged. As far as belonging goes, a quarter of kids strongly disagreed with the statement, I feel like I belong at my school. And so to kind of get back to these top-down initiatives that really put disciplinary content and test scores sort of above everything else, well, this administrator at this building really thought, like, we've got the cart before the horse. We've been doing all these things to try to raise our, reading and math scores and our, our English scores and everything else. And look where it's gotten us. We've had flat test scores and our kids don't want to be here. Let's take care of this problem first and the test scores will follow. So really focusing on kids being able to explain what's bothering me to other people when they're angry or upset, finding solutions to problems when they disagree with people, finding that school can be a place where their classmates care about me, and there's an adult at school I can count on to help me, to agree with the statements like this school is a good place for students like me. So that is sort of the quantitative data that then we went in and asked the follow-ups and the focus groups to get a lot of good qualitative data. Like, what is it, what's a word that you would use to describe school? What's an empowering experience you've had? Or what's a disempowering experience you've had? And then taking those in total, right, and saying, like, how does this speak to the system as a whole, right? Seems designed to disengage and make kids feel a lack of belonging and not understand themselves and their emotions. So then bringing the resources to bear on humanizing those learning spaces to be places where kids feel like they belong. They feel like they understand themselves in relation to others. They feel hopeful about the future. At school, they get to do what they do best every day. They feel safe, they have fun, they have friends, all of the things that we'd imagine kids experience at school when the reality is quite the opposite.
Amazing. I want to jump in.
Jump
I
away.
do. What does that look like? So when you ask the children, what would make you feel like you belong more? What kind of things do they say? And then what freedom do the teachers have to put those ideas into practice? Because I have this where I am at the Hive, which is, I've built a space that is designed for that, and they still come and say there isn't a space for this, or there isn't, like, we're constantly in that dialogue and constantly improving and changing and responding. I wonder how easy that is to do in a mainstream school setting.
Yeah, well, it's so interesting, right? Because I think too, a lot of times a problem that we run into in talking with kids and teachers in particular is like they are still stuck in a grammar of school. Like you can only speak from what you know. So I'll just give a quick example. Like one of the things kids talked about pretty recently, we're like, oh, what was like an interesting or fun thing? Where do you feel like you really belonged at school? And they would talk about assemblies because they got to like participate, like, oh, when I got to play basketball during the assembly in front of like all my peers and everything else. Because that's the grammar, that they have of school for that. So that's when they felt belonging, not the other, 4 days of the week that they weren't participating in this assembly, right? So then sort of stepping back from a systemic lens, what that allows us to do though is say like, okay, it's not necessarily that a kid likes an assembly. They like times where they get to like shine in front of their peers and, do the things that they feel that they're best at and, feel that sense of community and belonging. So how do we just extend that and build that, bake that into the rest of the school day, right? Instead of just having it be this one-off thing where like we did an assembly, everyone feels great, go back to math class, right? Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so, well, then that's where the partnership comes in with teachers and schools. Say, like, what could that look like throughout the rest of the day? And for example, in this Third Coast Learning Collaborative project, where we really again have resources and permission to design the rest of the school day, what that looked like, sort of a minimum of 3 hours a week of like the interdisciplinary project-based learning. But then what teachers also did is they took a portion of the day and turned it into like a more open-ended, almost like an elective time where kids have options to choose from like a genius hour or clubs, or maybe that's a time where teachers work one-on-one with students or groups to like help them like that. We call it like the response to intervention, RTI in the US. But like just block that time out so then kids have more agency, autonomy. They can work with their student clubs. So what they had kids do is they had them, pitch different ideas for student clubs. You had maybe like anime manga club, where then like the group of 5 kids who are really into that, they can like read all the mangas and talk about characters and stuff that they're into. There's, like sort of like chess club idea, or a tabletop gaming club, D&D clubs, those for kids who want to engage in those kind of communities. But the teachers also put like this requirement that like you can't just be in that group all year, right? Like we're at the quarters, or I forget whatever the window they set for them. You got to rotate between those clubs. So we'll have a chance then to pitch some new clubs, or you can volunteer to switch to a different one, but you can't stay with the same group of people, to encourage like getting involved in a lot of different activities. And we've been there on the ground, like during this genius hour and during all these other kinds of things. And the vibe is just immaculate, right? It's like that quiet hum of like, students are like fully engaged and engrossed, but it's not teacher led, right? Kids have, they build the protocols with adult supports on what it looks like to access the room and materials and where do you need to go to do these things. Really a night and day difference from the way, it was before, where if you imagine 6th, 7th, and 8th graders needing a lot of adult redirection, there might be some pretty like rigid, like, hey, 1, 2, 3 eyes on me sort of things, or teachers trying to yell over rambunctious kids. And this is like, hey, you guys know what to do during Genius Hour. We've got 50 minutes. Let's go ahead and do that. I'll be checking in with some of you who need, help with all of your other kinds of things along the way. Go. And the
Wish
kids,
everyone could have a chance to witness
yeah.
a group of children in flow. Even if
Yes.
they're all just in their own flow, right? In little groups of flow. It is,
yeah.
Imagine, and we don't have our whole day, it goes in and out, right? But people say, well, how do they know when it's time to eat? How do they know when it's time to go? They just kind of do. Like the food is always prepared at the same time, and we flow from one thing, then we get like deep into flow, but also the day flows better because we're just going, we come in and out of that space, and there's a freedom to go in and out of that. And there's so much trust. And I think if you've never seen it, if you haven't experienced it, you almost can't believe that it's possible. Yeah. And then when you do, it just opens up opportunities.
It's just a completely different game that you're playing, isn't it? There's so much of the language that has dominated education discourse in this country in recent years has been around like cognitive science and the knowledge-rich curriculum and retrieval practice, and it's almost like and codification. People talk about that we're going to codify exactly what it is. What is the sort of the if-then little routine and ritual that the teacher needs to execute in order to achieve these outcomes, down to the slightest little micro behaviors, and it's sort of like being treated almost like an engineering problem. That it's just like the aim of education is to transfer information from the curriculum, from the teacher's head, into the long-term memory of the child, and that it's just this very sort of mechanistic model, almost like a machine-like model of reality. And you're talking about flow, and that's just something that's just happening on a. It's not just an extension of that. It's just a completely different idea. It's like nobody talks about flow, which is like, the highest state of learning that you could aspire to. Nobody talks about that in the mainstream system here. And so I just wonder, thank you, Nick, for those very sort of rich examples of what it looks like. I just wonder if, Kate, you'd like to just share like just an example of what that might look like in a not a mainstream school. Like what does human-centered education look like when the stabilizers are off and you don't have to then tick the box and go back to maths? You can just, pursue that river of human activity throughout the day. Can you just give us a sense of what that looks like? And you could include some warts and all as well. I'm sure it's not all roses.
No. So a typical day for us, we start at roughly 8:30. That already gives you an indication. Everybody comes in at roughly 8:30. And the first thing we do is check in. So we all get together in space, and we sort of take our temperature, if we were, and we have a little model for the nervous system that we use that's called the mate's house. And you've got the living area where you're connected, feel safe, secure. You've got the attic where you're feeling those fizzy feelings, right? If you might be getting close to being dysregulated. And then you've got the basement, which is where you feel that you're stuck. You can't quite get moving. You've got, you've dropped into freeze, almost not fully there, but of the feelings like that. And so we then have a space of roughly 25 minutes to regulate our nervous systems. And so we all get to decide what it is we need to do to get ourselves into the living area so that we are ready to then go on a learning journey. And so that can look like a bunch of kids who've come in, they're chatting, they're talking to each other, they're feeling ready, they feel great, they want to sit around, play cards. They'll sit and play a game of cards, or they'll just have a chit chat about whatever they saw on the television, whatever. Some will go for a walk. Some will need to go and we have a punch bag. One of the staff might run some yoga. We might sing. We might do, there's a whole kind of everybody, like the high energy kids go in that direction. The low energy kids don't move very far, and we try and get them to, get going something. And then we all come back together and we look at what our plan is. Like, what have we planned to achieve this week? What have we planned to achieve today?
Can I just pause you for a second? So that bit that you were just talking about, where some of them are hitting the punch bag, some of them are playing cards, this is like the self-regulation bit, right? So it's like wherever they are, basement, attic, somewhere in the middle, this is like time for them to regulate and to do whatever it is that they feel they need to do to get into that living space. Is that it? And how long roughly is that taking? What time of the day is it now?
It's in the morning. So it's about 20 minutes. And sometimes it's shorter. So if we come in and everyone goes, yeah, living area, feeling great, I'm really excited about what we've planned to do today, we just go, does anybody need anything? No, we're good. Right, boom, boom, let's go. Right, we have extra time. But it's not enforced. So it's not, you all have to regulate your nervous systems in this way because we've decided that yoga is the answer, or mindful meditation is the answer, or it could be, but maybe not for you today. And so they, enforced regulation doesn't really work. So, but self-regulation really, really does. And when they can genuinely argue with you because you've decided that they're doing too much of the same thing all of the time, they go, no, but it makes me, I feel like this afterwards, I've got this out of my system. I don't know, go, oh, okay then.
Yeah.
But my problem is not intervening. I find it hard not to join in and go, sure, let's do this today, right? I still have that. So that's my work that I have to do. But the kids, after a while, they get really good at it. And, the other day, someone was feeling sad. Something had happened in their personal life. And so they decided that what they wanted, someone had a poem for that they'd seen in a book that was on the shelf. And then I wandered off and I came back with a cup of tea. And there were all of these preteens reading each other their favorite poem. Now, if you asked a mainstream teacher, what would happen if you wandered off to make a cup of tea and you left a bunch of 11-year-olds to do whatever they wanted to do? They would not believe me that what they chose to do was find a poetry book and read one another out loud their favorite poem. So I get to witness that on a daily basis. And then I get to witness them come up with an idea. And often it's overambitious. And I can look at it and go, oof, 6 weeks, that's, we're gonna hit some difficult patches in this. But then I have all of the stuff that James and I have been working, all these little tools and strategies that we've developed over the years. I'm gonna throw that one into the sandpit there, teach them how to use this one, get them to practice this one again, and then leave them. So I get to come in, support tightly, then loosen up a bit, support tightly, loosen up. So our day is divided into moments that are always the same. So we always eat together. We always have time for checking in the morning and checking out at the end of the day. But we have lots of flexibility as well. So there's no real bells. If we're really in flow, if everybody's really doing a thing, then we can keep going with that and catch up on something else at a later time. So I think that the biggest thing I have is the luxury of time, and it's a real privilege. And I understand that. I'm grateful for it. I remember that not everybody has the freedom to do things in the way that I do.
Yeah.
Can I speak to that real quick, James? Only because I'm making so many connections, right? Like if you just take a step back to think about the need that those practices are meeting, right? Like that transition from home to school, right? Not every kid it enjoys, a not turbulent, home life when they make that transition to school. So just giving them that time and space to regulate and make that transition in their own time, to build the tools and then use them in their own toolkit as they, and with supportive adults to help make that transition into a school day, I think is so incredible. And like it's such a vital time to anything, right? Is that necessary transition from home into school. And another kind of criticism, or I guess a complaint, I dealt with this with colleagues when I was at high school teaching too. Here we had sophomores, juniors, seniors about to ready to graduate. And, colleagues would say stuff like, oh, these kids, they don't have any executive skills. How can you let them make choices about things? They don't know how to control themselves. And you're like, well, it's a little bit of a self-inflicted problem because we denied them that for going back to, earlier and earlier ages. And so things like this are like, well, yeah, with the help of supportive adults and supportive communities, we're going to get kids to self-regulate, build those executive skills, or however you want to frame it, get those tools in their toolkit, and then give them the room and space and support and trust to be able to use them to become functioning human beings in any space that they enter into, and don't need an adult, harping at them or ringing a bell or doing anything else, because they know how to function with themselves and each other in a space. What is there a better goal than that, I wonder, other than adult control?
It makes sense to me to let them figure out which ones work and how they work on low stakes things, right? Like I want to build my chicken house like this. Oh, that's clearly not going to, the chicken's not going to fit through that door, right? Like I can look at it and I know they're going to spend a week and they're going to bang their feet and they're going to get cross and frustrated. And at the end, the chicken's not going to fit. Like I know that, but they're really sure. So we're going to let them go. And then afterwards, I have a whole week baked into my time for making reflections. A whole week for making reflections about everything that was learned along the way. And we have 3 questions that we answer. What did you learn? Like, so first, what did you do today? What did you learn about yourself, about other people, and about the world? Right? Those are our reflective questions. So like, I did all these things. Okay, what did you learn from that? And so it can be, oh, I learned that I get frustrated more quickly, or I'm getting less frustrated actually, or blah, 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 blah. But it doesn't matter. But opening up that space for a reflective conversation and watching the penny drop, right? Oh, you know, maybe if I hadn't rushed off quite so quickly, maybe if I'd listened for a little bit longer, maybe if I just looked at a couple of designs for chicken coops that someone else made first, right? Like maybe the outcome would have been different. And then saying, do you recognize this pattern in anything else in your life? Like, have you ever felt like this before? Have you ever come up against something like this before? And transferring it across, you know, you might find that this is a habit that you could potentially break before it, you know, follows you all the way into adulthood. And so instead of young people coming out at the age of 18, 19 and deciding that they want to buy this house and marry this person, and you're looking at them going, oh, that's not going to work. But you can't have that conversation with them because they've never practiced making a decision before and living to regret it and thinking about would they do it differently. They've made potentially a catastrophic life choice because they've never practiced making choices that might be good or might be bad. Someone else has always made them for them.
Yeah.
But the trade-off is that maybe they know algebra 2 really well.
Yes.
On the other hand, so that's the trade-off.
It seems to me that there's something as well in the way that you work, which is about that you were talking about having a whole week for reflection, and you work in these 6-week blocks, which is like these little mini projects, and then in the next 6-week block, I know some of the kids just come for 6 weeks and then leave, don't they? But some of them are there all year round, and some of them might continue with what they were doing for the next 6-week block, or they might tie it off. And that's much more of like an organic way in which we work, right? Like I'm a freelance like consultant, basically. I work for myself, and that's how I work. I have these little mini projects. I have essentially my little mini to-do list of stuff that's just annoying things that I need to do. But then there's like a meaty project, and that's sort of those things get completed, and then I move on to the next one and the next one. And that's how we sort of just naturally are as humans. But in the school system, we have this, like, you have an hour of geography that starts when you're really young, like halfway through primary school, and you're still having an hour or 2 of geography, 10 years later, as though it's just this like linear thing. And it just seems like such an unnatural way to learn, right? That's not really a question,
totally,
or just a comment.
No. But it's the same with both of you were talking. And Kate, when you were talking about that reflection space, again, I connect like back to John Dewey. These are not new ideas. These are ideas that are 100 years old, right? That space between action and reflection is in intention, right? So just it's not reacting to the things around you, but it's pausing to say like, oh, right? Like it's pausing to recognize those patterns and those connections and everything else, And again, Dewey said, like, we don't learn from those experiences, but reflecting on those experiences. And so, yeah, like just making space for those pauses between action. Whereas I think in the other models just really value the go, the producing, right? It's a production model of education, which is what it is to produce test scores and to produce certifications and produce all these things, where this one's really like, I don't know, maybe the differences between fast food and like the slow food movement, right? Not to do just like churn out calories and get food to the counter, but like, how can we really, be intentional and build human beings over here in a real deliberate, intentional way? So they don't get to important life choices and say, right, crap, I know what a past participle is, but I don't know anything about how to manage myself in human relationships, which might also be a real important skill to navigate my whole 60-year lifespan outside of the walls of, primary and secondary school or whatever.
So do you think that the schools that you're working with in America now, do you think that they can like begin to transition from these boxed ways of doing things, the traditional way of doing things. And because I think I think things evolve. They don't change overnight. They need time, they need support to gently evolve into something new. So we have, like, integration is built into this little model that it's like a 6-part model that I've designed. And so we make space to integrate, and we ask, what did you learn? Will it serve you? Do you want to keep it and use it again in your future? Or is this something that no longer serves that you can leave behind? So as you're going through life and growing up, you're having some skills and things that you keep forever, and others that no longer serve you, that you can begin to leave behind. You can begin to leave behaviors behind, and that creates space for new things to come in, so it flows. Like, is there something that we can be doing with teachers, with schools that are in this rigid system, to kind of start to allow them to soften and make a bit more space for this kind of way of practicing?
That's like the dilemma, right? Is how do we scale? I hate that word scale, because it makes it seem like all of these things should just be able to translate into, serving millions of people. And maybe they're designed not to, in my opinion. But I think it's an interesting problem in the United States, like the U.S. Department of Education being what it is, right? We have real loose, like, national framework for what education looks like. It's mostly up to 50 states, and there's something like 13,000 public school districts across the whole country. And so to the same thing that you were saying earlier, Kate, about, like, if you haven't seen these practices in action, you would never believe that they would work. And I think right now what's happening is that there are so many schools just in pockets, right? Just a real courageous school leader somewhere in, some off corner of a state, who's doing, like, really innovative work within a public school. But for a lot of different reasons, maybe doesn't want a lot of, like, the publicity and the, perhaps the strings and the attention and the pressure that comes with that, and just wants to, allow this thing to flourish in its own space. I visited a middle school in Winchester, Virginia, and I would never believe this, right? A middle school that didn't have bells, like a public school that didn't have bells to transition kids. And I remember him pausing. We were doing a little tour, and he just paused. He goes, "Notice what you didn't hear just then, and notice what you see." And what you saw, hundreds of 6th and 7th and 8th graders transitioning quietly in the hallways, right? Just going about their thing. He said, the kids get to where they need to go. And you know what? If some of the kids don't go where they need to go, well, that's when, adults step up and just, ask, hey, is everything okay? What can we, so there's things to redirect them in there. But, I've seen that model in practice. So I'd never be able to say that would never work here, right? And there are these little pockets. I've seen them, visited them. We try to implement this one in Michigan, right? And I think it really comes from, this is not something that I would have said as a classroom teacher who had a lot of contentious relationships with the opposite kind of administrator. But we really see these practices flourish in places where there are courageous school leaders. So that's building principals who know their staff, who know their kids, who know their communities, and they're willing to push the envelope, make space, take the blows as needed to, right? But they know that these practices are what their kids in communities need, and they can advocate, through their superintendents, their school boards, and everything else for, these spaces of innovation or whatever, even if they have to tie it to really mainstream things. But, you could get a grant to start a garden at your school where you can get thousands of dollars if any of that food that you grow lands on student plates. Right. So it's like, okay, if we start a community garden, then maybe we can get the money for a student kitchen, and then we can have kids, learning disciplinary, and interdisciplinary ideas out next to the school with, agriculture and biology and earth sciences, bringing those into like a culinary arts and all those things, but just really thinking creatively about those. And then, of course, I think just courageous and teachers who are willing to take those risks alongside them, because not everything is going to work, right? It's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's a lot of not difficulty, but like you got to manage transitions, right? You're shifting from one grammar of school and the way school should function to another. So as educators, you got to deprogram yourself. Students, you have to onboard them to a whole new different set of expectations. But then once you do that, I think, you're always sort of onboarding and deprogramming, I think, but it makes subsequent years that much easier, right? Which is so great to scaffold a program that builds upon subsequent grade levels because those expectations aren't going to change. It's just that you're going to, get more complex and in depth with what the things are that you're looking at, release more control over to kids as they, mature and develop and become better at those things too, and really, come out at the peak of their game. The other big transition, I think, is, and this is a shift for me as well. So I used to view all administrators as the bad guys because they would always squash the things that I wanted to do. But then courageous administrators allow good practices to flourish. The other thing too is I think progressive educators need to not be scared of the word data because the other side, right, is going to bring to bear a lot of that on the practices that they want you to implement in classroom, right? Research, evidence, data. And we need to be able to fight that battle too, right? So what are you going to bring to the table that shows that these practices are better? It can't just be vibes. Fortunately, I think there is a lot of research, but a lot of that has to come from you. That has to happen on the ground in your own context. Teacher action research, sort of ethnographic research and things. And I've learned a lot about that through the evaluation process for this program. So since the grant comes with these strings attached from the Department of Education at the time, would have been published through the, education sciences, been, published as a peer-reviewed study of this implementation in programs in middle schools. So we had to come up with some scientific, random control trial about how do we assess the impact of these things on kids. I learned a lot that I would have said before, like, oh, you can't assess that or measure that. Well, it turns out you really can. And education researchers, sociologists, motivation scientists all have a lot of cool ways to evaluate all of that. And so it goes from being like, oh, isn't this just great? Doesn't this feel good? Doesn't this look great? Like, aren't the kids having fun and everything else to, oh, did you know that office referrals are down 50% from where they were last year for kids who completed this
Yeah,
program?
right. That's
Oh,
it. So there's data and there's data, isn't there? Like I think
yeah.
it's a bit of a problem with the whole evidence informed. Oh, there's so much to unpack there. This all sort of like shift towards like evidence informed practice, which is really
Yeah.
like that language is really sort of taken hold alongside this sort of COGSI wave that's happened in recent years.
Mm,
And often that's just like the EEF, the Education Endowment Foundation, this big organization in this country, huge budget to run hundreds of these randomized controlled trials, and nearly always the outcomes of those studies are just attainment. It's just reading scores and math scores basically. And I
that's it.
think that if those are your outcome measures, I think that progressive educators are at a disadvantage because they are convergent things. Like if you want to teach kids how to read, sit them down and teach them how to read. Like that's the most effective way to teach them how to read and how to pass math
Hmm.
is just to explicitly teach them that stuff. And by its nature, progressive education and the kinds of project-based learning that you're talking about and inquiry and finding your flow and following your interests and so on, by its definition, that stuff is not easy to show up on a standardized attainment test. And so it's a difficult battle to fight that. But I think that you're spot on by saying, like, look at these kinds of data. And actually, there's so much data that we have in this country. The stuff about attendance is really not looking good. Teacher recruitment, teacher
Hmm.
retention, mental
Hmm.
health, bullying, like misogyny and sexual abuse is really rampant and rife in schools. There are so many indicators that things aren't going well that we maybe need to just cast the net wider. And that's how we can play that game of evidence informed education, as it were. But it's just like throwing the net wider than those test scores. I just, yeah, go on.
Chip in and ask,
Yeah.
just put an ask out there to anyone
Yeah.
who's listening, because I know that if it weren't for you, if you hadn't joined my team back then and you hadn't had a personal interest in doing PhD, I would still be in a classroom doing my thing. I might be one of those courageous head teachers in a little school somewhere. I mean, I suppose I still am
Hmm.
in the Dominican Republic, aren't I? But there's also you doing podcasts and forcing me to write a book with you and getting it out there, right? I would be quietly in my corner just doing my thing, for the children in my
Mm.
community in my way, because that's how I am, that's how I function. And so if I hadn't had you collecting the data and doing your PhD, we wouldn't have all of that. And so I think if you're a data person in education and you'd love to do a PhD and collect things like that, I bet that there are these courageous teachers who need partners, because the time it would take me to learn how to do all of those things would take me away from my primary passion, which is building relationships with the children that are right in front of me every day and their parents and the community. And so that I remember how busy we used to be. I'm not so busy now. It's easy for me to look in from the outside and say, gather data. But I remember that it was all consuming when we were at the beginning of building what we were building, that it had to work. And so maybe those of us that are now on the outside who understand how to gather the data, there's some work there that we can do around supporting the courageous teachers who are doing it a bit differently to gather that data, so that there's more, because the evidence that we're being informed by is all of one variety.
Right.
There's not much evidence that isn't from the 70s of this, how impactful this kind of education can be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Nick, if we may, the projects, the funded projects that you're doing that you mentioned in Michigan and Virginia, is that correct?
Yeah. So in Michigan is where the Third Coast Learning Collaborative is, but we've partnered with a ton of schools on a lot of different grant funded projects, particularly in Ohio, is another big one that we've worked with out there. And I think we'll be expanding that in the very near future.
Right. So please could you just I know you briefly mentioned it at the start of this conversation, but please can you just take us into this project? So you applied for this funding. You said that this is a randomized controlled study, right? Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's what was really surprising for me it's a randomized control trial. They were able to set up the randomization criteria and everything else to like have it meet like the gold standard, the same that you would use for like a medical trial. It's wild.
And what is the intervention? Does it have a name?
Yes. Well, so it's like the Third Coast Learning Collaborative is like the name of the intervention, and that comes with three criteria. So the first one I might have mentioned is a minimum 3 hours a week of interdisciplinary project-based learning. And it doesn't have to be 3 hours. So, for example, our first year cohort, they did 10 hours a week. And we kind of maybe learned that is maybe a little bit too much. that's a lot. It's just a lot to plan for, honestly. Another cohort that we're launching here stuck with 5, kind of in the middle ground. But 3 is sort of like the baseline for the intervention. Now, to speak again to metrics and measures, what's really cool though, is that having those differences in that area in particular will allow us to evaluate like the dose response effect, right? What's the difference between taking 2 Tylenol and 6, or, taking 30 milligrams of some other, more effective medicine and 100, like we'll get that dose response for PBL.
Please, can I just pause you there and just ask you about what that looks? So again, interdisciplinary learning is something that just entirely absent from our education system in England.
Okay.
So can you please just shine a little light on what that looks like? What might those 3 hours look like? And you mentioned that it takes a lot of planning. So these are taught lessons where the teacher's having to do a lot of the legwork to blend this with different disciplines or to create projects that could you please just walk us through an example?
Of course. Yeah. Honestly, I think the legwork is not necessarily on teachers in those like 3, 5, 10 hours or whatever, right? The legwork is up front. In terms of like the planning and structuring of what like a long-term, interdisciplinary PBL experience looks like. Probably a lot like what Kate is talking about. I mean, if you're familiar at all with those UN SDG, the Sustainable Development Goals projects, those are big interdisciplinary projects, right? That you can connect to those communities to. But for example, the interdisciplinary part is just to say it just sort of collapses those barriers between English, math, science, social studies, like all those core classes, and just says, okay, we're going to kind of tackle all of those all at once. Now, On the planning side, what that typically looks like is teachers rotating through projects as like a lead planner and like maybe a lead subject, because you might have a cool project idea that lends itself more to like the science and math portion, right? Like it's more of a STEM project this time around,
Mhm.
that then the English and social studies teachers are going to work to build some kind of disciplinary connection to it, you know? So if you were talking about, let's say, you know, we're off Lake Michigan up there. So if you were going to say like, okay, we're going to study the impact of climate change on, you know, the ecosystems around Lake Michigan. That's a great, you know, science project. You can build in ratios, you know, proportions and measurements, all these things from the STEM side. Well, then the English and science might say like, okay, how has that same thing either been impacted or impacting also the social and economic forces around the lake, right? Let's study its history with like lumber and transportation and right. Let's look at the colonization and indigenous factors here, right? Who was on this land before us and how did they interact with these environments, right? So you might spend 6 or 8 weeks, or you know, you can be pretty flexible on those big long-term goals to say like, okay, what is the impact of climate change on Lake Michigan? Well, that's probably going to involve going to Lake Michigan in some capacity, connecting with, there's awesome like local community colleges, but of course, Michigan has wonderful, you know, public universities too. Connecting with researchers or academics and people to have them on the ground, help have the scientists run those samples or explain, hey, here's how this here's how this wetland has changed over the course of this. You might do a species. Oh, I know there's a way that you can like count the species in a circle or like in a square kind of grid, and then you like extrapolate that out to do population measurements, right? Or you do like a history walk. You know, I'm trying to think of, you build those experiential pieces in there too to actually send kids out into the field or bring those researchers in to the classroom space to help them do that. That's definitely a component, is those field trips.
Lovely. Thank you.
But
Okay, so
yeah,
you said that there was three. Sorry to interrupt you there.
no, you're good.
You said that there was three strands, and so is it interdisciplinary the
Yep.
first one?
Yep, that's just the first one. So they got to have a minimum of 3 hours to say that they're part of TCLC, right? The
Okay.
second one I had mentioned before was that feedback-driven, portfolio-based assessment. And all of these words are just because we had to formalize them in a grant. You know, it's always called something different somewhere else, but we sort of simplified that to say like, rather than give a grade the first time around when you're talking about student work, the first thing you're going to do is just give feedback on it. And typically, I think what those loops look like is, you know, you have some sort of self-reflection. So you're giving kids either some tools or some models, some exemplars or something to say like, hey, what does the end product look like for our learning around this climate change in the lake project? And maybe you'll have kids work in some collaborative groups on some certain things. But the first step is always going to be like some amount of self-reflection and evaluation. Am I, you know, meeting those criteria? And if not, how do I iterate on that project? The second step might be peer feedback, right? So you're going to observe, you know, other projects that your peers are working on, or you might have them give you some feedback, iterate on that. And typically, I think the third step then is like adult feedback, right? So empowering kids to, again, like, hey, the first thing is going to be yourself to use your own tools, use each other, and then I can sort of give you that next level, and then iterate on that either until it, you know, we reach a deadline. And I think a lot of times, Kate, to what you said, kids get really ambitious, right? And you have to dial down to say like, what can we hit in 6 weeks, guys? We're not going to be able to build a boat and sail it out on there to get a sample from the bottom of Lake Michigan. Like that can't happen. But what can we do in microcosm? You know, how can we capture a similar idea? Yeah, then, you know, just engage in that iterative feedback process. Then as kids go throughout the year, they're adding that stuff to a portfolio. The first cohort that we used decided, hey, we already have Google Suite. Kids know how to use it. They're just going to add that to like an ongoing Google Slides thing, right? So it's like, hey, what's the evidence that you're going to be able to show to somebody else if you don't have a grade? What did you do for this project, right? What was your learning? What was a target that you had? Did you meet those goals? What are the artifacts that you can use to support that? Like it's a pretty typical portfolio building process. But the end of the year, then kids are going to end up with an iterative, right, feedback driven portfolio that they can show, you know, at the end of, you know, the year at an expo night or some other sort of public exposition where if you have parents, community, you know, the people in the school board, the superintendent ask, how's this program going? What are kids doing? You showcase all that stuff, right? You make it self-evident that like kids are learning. Here's the awesome stuff that they did. Here's what they made. Here's what they learned. They can speak it to you in your own words. And that's sort of the third criteria. So we've got the PBL, we've got the assessment part, and then, you know, some sort of public exposition of learning there at the end, just to
And
showcase
that's
all
like
of that.
student led. So the students are presenting what they've learned, like some teachable moment or something.
Yep, exactly. It's just a showcase like, hey, you know, pick either, maybe it's and or a work in progress, something that you didn't quite think you landed the plane on, but you know, thinking I love Kate's framing there of like, what pattern did you notice either about yourself or about the work, like that you learned that you need to do better next time, right? That's often as informative as like, hey, I was really successful and I, you know, I did the perfect thing the first time around. But you're also going to showcase those things too, because they're just like an important part of like building the community, making that authentic learning real. Because like authentic work has an authentic audience. You know, we tell kids, guys, if you're going to write a book, you're going to want people to read that book. You're going to need an audience and get feedback on it and, you know, do the book tour, et cetera. If you build a museum exhibit, it's got to go in the museum, right? People have to see it. People need to engage and interact with it. So just really connecting that work to the authentic audience, which again, I think coming back to first principles, it's about building community. It's about, you know, building authentic relationships, breaking down those barriers between school and the community to say like, I don't have to ask what my kid did at school today because they came and told me about the field trip right away. And then I went to the expo and I saw, you know, I saw their work in progress on, you know, this measurement tool that they're going to use to track the development of the wetlands or whatever, right? Like I saw all that stuff. I don't have to guess or look at a report card. It's there. It's self-evident for me.
Yeah. That's great. I had Ron Berger on the podcast a while back. It was 20 years after his book, The Ethic of Excellence. I imagine that you're familiar with Ron's work, are you?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, authentic real world outcomes is obviously a huge part of what makes these things successful. And so, what's your role in this? Are you like providing the resources? Are you training the teachers? Is it both?
Yeah.
And like, how hands on is it across this multi-year project?
Yeah. So what's really cool is that like and again, I'm thinking of the evaluation side. The other big evaluation trick, you know, that the evaluators are up against is like, what is it about what HRP is doing that is helping to build this project? Like, how do we know HRP's intervention on teachers is
Right.
working to get those outcomes too? So we've had to think a lot about, you know, those big rocks. Like, what are those things that we need to do with teachers to, you know, make sure that's that? And really, it all comes down to like a model of professional development with teachers that looks like what they're doing with kids. So it's a lot of getting feedback from kids about what is it that we're going to do? What are the things that you want to tackle here? Of course, we have some standardized materials that are really just like templates for conversations around portfolio-based assessment, right? Like why would we think about this? What are some models that we can use to think about this? And let's build that model together. So that's collaborative, right? And same with building PBL projects. You know, like here's some models and examples. Here's the theory behind how this works. Here's some models of HQ PBL, liberatory project-based learning, all these kinds of things. Here's how we can help you build that. So really, like, the secret sauce is that this isn't something where we just go through and do a standardized PD, or teachers don't sit down at a computer and go through like an online course or something. So teachers got 90 minutes of professional development in letters training, and then they implemented this program with kids, and we saw a 7.3% increase in vowel recognition among right? It's not that sort of intervention, which is really, I think, striking. The secret sauce is our collaboration. It's really sort of boutique. So that's where the scalability part really is a challenge, in the sense that we're building this thing together, guys. It's not something that's print and play. You're going to need to be collaborators with us as much as we are with you, because so much of what you're going to be doing on the ground is contextual. It's connected to the place where you're at. It's connected to the questions and problems that the kids in your community want to resolve. We can't swoop in and do that. So yeah, our thing is to just help support teachers and build on-ramps to new ideas, help them take risks, and really go wild. Can I speak real quick to a success story of this?
Please do, yeah.
Would be really cool. The feedback that we've gotten from teachers, both for the PD and for, implementation of this project in particular, at least two separate teachers in two different grade levels. They might be two different buildings too. Have said these are long-term veteran teachers, 30 plus years, I think, who have said, this is what I imagined teaching was when I started. Like really connecting back to that original purpose. And one of the teachers who we thought, might have been more traditional in their mindset, basically pitched us the wildest idea ever about basically building a mini golf course around the school, but then building in the physics of how the discs fly. How do what's the process like to do this thing? And then having kids perhaps build like a machine that like throws the discs, almost like, have you seen those catapults that do like pumpkin chunking and stuff like that to see you can throw the farthest thing? Build a machine that can throw the disc into the mini golf thing. So that's a real STEM heavy focus on that, but really going hog wild with that idea is really fun.
Amazing. That sounds so cool. And so just a final question on this little section. What's the timeline of this project? Like how far into it are you at the moment?
Yeah, well, barring anyone at the Department of Education deciding to turn the light switch off at any moment, I suppose, in theory, it's going to take us, it's a 5-year project. We're in year 2. It's going to take us to 2029. And the idea at the time, again, we don't know what the future holds necessarily, that this would be the early phase of the grant, just like a proof of concept. And then phase 2 would be some kind of small expansion to try it out in like an adjacent context to do that. And then another 5 years for phase 3. So over 15 years, then actually expand it either regionally with some more support or export that model to an entirely different, take it to Kentucky or something and see if kids in Kentucky and schools in Kentucky can be successful with a Third Coast Learning Collaborative model. So yeah, that was the expected timeline. It's kind of up in the air right now, but
Wow. Okay. So long-term thinking. Love it.
yep.
That's really fascinating. Right. So there's a few ways in which we could take the conversation now. There's one question that just like going back to some of the stuff that we were talking about earlier. I was just thinking about like some of the barriers and the obstacles. Like what are the things that are going to stop these ideas from taking root more widely? Like before we started this conversation, I was talking with Kate a little bit about power and how under the sort of the prevailing the paradigm of like the teacher centered, what you described before as like content driven, test score driven, teacher driven, agenda. There's a power dynamic there as well as it being sort of teacher centered. It's also like the teachers have all the power there and they sort of like are calling the shots, and some people talk about power, but you don't hear that talked about that much. And Kate was sort of saying that you think that it's more just that like people really believe that that sort of teacher-led model is the best way to go, and that they don't know is that it's sort of driven out of the fact that they don't know, for example, like what you were talking about earlier, like that kids actually are able to take that responsibility when they're shown how to do it and when they're given the time and space to do it. There's something like that essentially the problem is like the model of what kids are capable of doing in the absence of micromanagement by adults. And so it's a very deep-rooted, knotty question, this one, but it goes really to the heart of people's identities. It's very ideological as well as sort of evidential. So, in a word, no, but like, so what? I invite either of you to get the ball rolling with this one. What do you think are the major barriers that are preventing this sort of stuff, which just sounds so like it's just what needs to be happening, and dare I say it, at scale, Nick? Like this does need to be happening across the length and breadth of the system. Like kids should be having like opportunities to stretch their legs, to try out what they are able to do, to compile these portfolio based, like these bottom up assessments, instead of assessments being seen as like a sort of Harry Potter sorting hat type thing. student-led exposition. Instead of getting a grade, it's just like there's something that, again, it's much more organic, it's much more bottom-up. This is the direction that I believe that we really need to go in at a system level. And so, yeah, how are we going to get from A to B? And what are the major blockers, do you think? And where are the pressure points? Where could we apply pressure to move the dial on this, do you think?
That's a big question. Kate, do you want to tackle that, or do you want me to start?
It's the question, isn't it? It's the question that we need to get our heads
Save the best for last.
We do talk about this a lot, don't we? I think a lot of it is to do with exposure. I still do believe that most people in education are in education because they want to do something, take action for the betterment of human children and humanity at large. I choose to believe that. I like to believe that. And I have evidence to suggest that I'm not completely wrong.
I agree with you.
And so I believe that exposure helps. I think that people genuinely don't trust that children are able to make decisions in their own best interests. I meet people all the time. I meet parents all the time who say things to me like, well, you don't just leave chocolate in the drawer, do you? You don't just let your child eat chocolate whenever they want to. And I say, yeah, I do. I do, because I've been raising my child in this way for 12 years and I trust her. I trust her to make a sensible judgment about whether or not she feeds herself chocolate. I also trust her to make a judgment on whether she's learned enough for today. I trust her to make a judgment. I trust other people's children to make those judgments too, because I've seen it. I've been doing this work since the early 2000s. You know, I started this journey in a normal classroom, and I just went, hang on a minute, this doesn't work. This is not sustainable. There has to be a better way. So I've been playing around with this for 25 years. I've got all the evidence I need that it works, but I don't think that everybody else does have. And so I think a large part of this for me is to get the evidence out there in some kind of creative way. That doesn't mean that teachers have to give up, you know, give up their job, give up their pension, sell their house and everything that they have just because they want to be sure that they're right. You know, most people can't do that.
This sounds a little autobiographical, Kate. I'm not.
You know, so how can we make it more available? How can we make the evidence more available? Because I think the lack of evidence is a big barrier. If you assume good intent, which I choose to do.
Yeah, power is an inextricable problem from schooling, right? And it's an inextricable problem in the data collection too, because what state and federal and national actors want to gather evidence about and what they choose to elevate and what they pass policies for are all driven inextricably by questions of power and ideology. I don't think it's an accident. I would argue that you've seen a lot of the hard, rigid, rooted in cognitive science, a lot of physical control pushed by people who also want to see more of that in the general population as well, right? In terms of increased, policing, social control, moral control, all these other kinds of things, and seeing schools as like their own laboratories for this, right? If we can get them as used to adult control and policing as possible, then they will also be used to that when they get out of there too. And I think that issue of trust is also inextricable from this, because it also, you'd find that these high control policies and societies are also probably pretty low trust societies, right? If you don't trust your neighbor and your community and your government and everything else, maybe in the US context, you will, stock up on ammunition and, put up walls. And I think in high trust societies where, years ago, the Finnish model was a big, exemplar for the world in sort of these progressive practices. But the Finnish society is also a very high trust society. So I don't think you can have like a mass movement of this without tackling those those inherent barriers about trust and fear, and those are inherent societal issues. I think there are things, though, right? And to get to what you were speaking to, Kate, like, and those courageous admin and those courageous teachers, to pair those things up and build their little pockets and paradigms, and then shout those things from the world, to gather that evidence. I think that is such an important part of the process. I think the other side of that too, well, not the other side, but the support for that would say, I think in research in like systems, and management and things, would say in education that the crap kind of flows downhill, as it were. So like if you're a really high control admin and you have, you control your teachers, then your teachers are also going to be high control in their, work with students. And like vice versa. If you're an admin who is high trust and, treats your teachers professionally and, gives them, autonomy, voice and choice and democratic decision making, well, they'll probably provide some systems for that too. I think an issue is that teachers and systems often self-select. So if you're a person who really values the adult high control, you're going to work in a system that has that. And if you're a teacher more like any of us, you're not going to want to be in there because it would be like abhorrent to your whole way of being. So there's some kind of sorting that goes through there too. But yeah, I think it's really like an awareness of power, an awareness of trust, and knowing that any time that you implement a practice in your classroom, it's either contributing to trust or taking it away, right? It's building towards a model that kids in your classroom can either see explicitly or understand implicitly, right? Because they're smart and they can grok like the way of the world here, towards like more adult control. And thus they will give up more of their power and autonomy, right? So I think a first step for educators wanting to build these spaces is just like be aware of your role in shaping that environment. You might have a really humanized classroom in a sea of dehumanizing practices just because you recognize your role in that and you're intentional about building structures that give over some adult control, not towards chaos, right, but towards self-regulation, right? Um, the opposite of like that adult controlled model is not chaos, right? It's self-regulation, it's community. It's we're in here to learn all this stuff together, and building structures and systems in your classroom that help that work. So I think step one is intentionality. Then for school districts and I guess school leaders, admin, and those kinds of things, being real intentional about those things too. And if those are the systems that you want to build, supporting and providing on and off ramps for your staff who want to build those, again, because I've seen the power of that in action. Then I think at the policy level, right, you gotta also just support that the environment that you want schools to exist in. What's the bigger pond, and how can you help contribute to those? So I think there's on and off ramps at each of those levels, whether you're a classroom teacher or a parent, whether you're a school leader or whether you're someone working out there in society. How are we contributing towards high trust, low high autonomy, or its opposite, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's not an answer, but I think that maybe helps frame it.
Just on that, I was just wondering. So you just mentioned about like the pond that schools are within, right, and the wider societal stuff. I've been doing some work recently, or really just having chats at this stage with a really interesting group of people who are based in the States as well, called World Systems Solutions, and they're sort of talking about the need for education reform, but also to say like like we could implement all. Imagine that me, you, and Kate got our way, right, and we unleashed this like wave of interdisciplinary project-based learning. The kids are self-regulating, they're in a state of flow, all of this cool stuff is happening, and then they go out into the world and they're just running into all these brick walls left, right, and center because the world isn't necessarily set up for those autonomous people to actually continue that way of being, right? That there are workplace regulations and there's all kinds of things that prevent people from living their dream, as it were. And they talk about the need to sort of to be rethinking society more widely, right, as well as rethinking education. I was just wondering, in terms of the Human Restoration Project, are you solely education focused, or do you sort of have your eye on that broader context as well?
You've outed us here, James. No, just in the way that schools are both, again, a microcosm of the world at large and a model for what we want the world to be. We're building the world as we want it to be in the future every day through our classroom practices, right? Because
Right.
once those kids leave the context of school and go out into the world, that will be their model for engaging with the world, right? So in terms of like job preparation, if you're going from a high autonomy, where you have a lot of say and control and everything else, and you find yourself thriving in school and then in a high control environment that, frankly, like of work that is dehumanizing, you might begin to agitate for some changes in a more humanizing direction for workplace and society and for policies and all these other things too, because you're going to be, more primed to see that in a particular direction. And again, I don't think it's really an accident that uh, it's a little bit of a feedback loop, isn't it? That we get people in positions of power who say, schools should look this particular way in our image that reflects society as well. And then we end up with the kind of world that we have right now, right? Where I don't know. I don't even have to name names to know that, like, if we think that the political system is the result of, right, all these other contextual factors, well, schools are contributing to that stuff too. And so I think, right, schools have to look like the world that we want to build. They need to be pluralistic. They need to be inclusive. They need to be embrace interdisciplinary learning. They need to be, humanizing. It sounds hacky, restore humanity to education, and yet I think we all know, again, intrinsically, like it speaks to that sense that school's not working for the human beings within them, and it's not working, to serve the society at large. And that first step, that recognition, really is the place then for intentional action in a more humanizing direction, whatever that looks like in your local context. But I think, again, yeah, like the responsibility to society and to the kids that we serve, and like schools as a world building project, I think it's as inextricable and undeniable as saying, like, yeah, like power is inextricable from schooling too. Like we have the ability to use that in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you for that. Okay, so we have a question now. I think Kate, you came up with this question, didn't you? About your own journey, Nick, and in terms of the work that you've been doing in the last few years. Do you want to take this one?
Oh, yeah, you kind of answered it a little bit talking, but I wondered how you have personally found the journey from being a teacher in a classroom, connecting to one other teacher from a classroom, into someone who now is an organization. So how have you found the move from being, two grassroots teachers right in there at the coalface to now being out here in an organization? How is that going for you?
It was a very tough transition. In part because the context that I was leaving was not great. I didn't leave under auspicious reasons. There were a lot of different push and pull factors that contributed to that. And it was a real difficult transition. I found myself as an educator really burned out, and needing to find a new way to engage myself in work, like again, to humanize my own working conditions and my own relationship to work. Um, and yeah, it took like a year, that first year, to sort things out. That was 2022, to be like, how do I even function? So much of, James, I think you had said, like, it's personal, right? It's your identity. It's wrapped up in teaching and those relationships. And now, I don't have those things to fault. So who am I? Who am I in the world? Who am I in my relationships to this work? Feeling a little bit, I don't know, of that imposter syndrome that I think when you step out of the classroom for the first time, be like, now I'm one of those people, right? Who's going to tell the classroom teachers what to do? Those people that I didn't, really jive with when I myself was a classroom teacher, sort of vowing that I was not going to be that person. And yeah, just kind of rediscovering my relationship to education in that vein. It was a tough first year, and then I think finding a niche, finding a lane, finding a new set of competencies, and kind of a new freedom just to be a lot like you were saying, James. Like it's essentially freelance. Like I get to pursue passion projects on the regular, a rotating cycle of awesome people that I get to work with, different teams and schools and communities that I get to visit around the world. I mean, HRP was privileged enough at one point to work with a partner of the Polish government and their Department of Education for a while. So spending time on the ground in Poland working interdisciplinary work there was incredible. Again, just to know that we've got colleagues all around the world who are engaged in the same stuff, and even you two who've got our backs in the UK and the Dominican Republic, respectively. And I think just recognizing the position that HRP is in now really is like we were like the underdog. We were just like the scrappy little upstart with just me and Chris, and now we have employees. We have a third full-time person. We have a staff of several part-time people who help us facilitate this work too. So like responsibility to that team and to the communities that we now serve of teachers and of teacher educators, future teachers, people who are interested in the profession and want to approach it from like a humane lens. And so, yeah, I take that responsibility really seriously. And I see myself as, just like I did in the classroom, as like a lead learner in that space. What can I do to better connect my community, right? I have a lot of responsibility as a leader in that, to new ideas and to create things that are going to help support those people who depend on us now. So again, I think there was a little bit of like wandering the desert, just trying to find my place, and now having, I guess, discovered it, really just enjoying the connections in the community and the work at a whole new level, just
Mm,
inspiring every single day.
mm. Amazing. Thank you for asking that. That's super interesting, and I'm seeing lots of parallels with my own journey as well. And we were also going to ask about international stuff. So you mentioned Poland there. Have you done
Yeah.
other stuff internationally?
Um, we have explored a lot of international partnerships, especially in Australia and New Zealand. Posse Solberg lives down there, and at the University of Melbourne now. I think Australia has a big sort of burgeoning progressive education movement. While I think at the same time they're grappling with a lot of the same reactionary forces that the rest of us in like the West are also having to deal with. Japan, oddly enough, we had some really interesting opportunities for partnerships with Japan that are kind of on the back burner. Australia is really on the forefront. We're trying to get out there to begin doing some of our work with schools in Australia. Chris is headed out there. He's going to go to, I think it's a conference in like Singapore, and then spend some time in Australia proper for a little bit. Yeah, I'm trying to think as well. That Polish partnership really was fascinating, rewarding, and oddly enough, so that partnership ended probably 2 years ago when we were able to start this work with the Department of Education here. But I just got an email yesterday. One of the people that we worked with is now in a different position, who works with the EU, with an agency there, and wants to sort of restart that partnership. At the Polish national level, but partnered through the European Union. So just seeing again the value that there's people around the world who, when they think about interdisciplinary learning, they think, oh, that human restoration, those two guys in the Midwest are really doing some cool stuff as far as that goes. It's like, well, who are we? We're just a couple of guys. But again, like I think it's really been heartening and humanizing to know that there's like solidarity, there's global solidarity on this front. Polish teachers of Ukrainian student refugees, right, who are acknowledging for the first time often, like that not everybody in Polish schools is Polish or Polish speaking or whatever, and how do I help meet their needs now, and approaching progressive education through that lens. Schools in Australia, at the forefront of climate change, just wondering, like, is this a system that's going to serve us into the future, or do we need to build a bridge, not just towards a different way of schooling, but a different way of organizing economic and social activity that begins, at the schoolhouse, because we can't be on fire for half of the year and support this. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it's wild that internationally people have come to HRP as like a repository for how to engage in that work.
Yeah, sure. And can I just ask you as well about community? Like you mentioned the Discord server earlier, and I know you often
Yeah.
give shout out to people on your podcast who support you and your organization. Can you just tell us a little bit about the community and a bit about the shape of that Discord server? Because I've been thinking about starting something similar myself. I'd just be interested to hear about that and how do you find that? Like previously, we had we were using a Mighty Network, and we had quite a lot of people on there. There was like nearly 1,000 people on the Mighty Network, but I found that we would have to like feed it a lot. It felt like it was a lot of work, and it just sort of felt like a
Mhm.
beast that we had to keep feeding, and it didn't really get to the point where it was like self-sustaining. I was just wondering how you found that because I think that it's really important to bring all of these people together, the strength in numbers, and also the cross pollinations that can happen there. I was just wondering about that side of things, the community stuff.
Of course. Yeah. Again, coming back to like the collapse of Twitter and like the fracturing, I think of like that edu Twitter space.
Mm.
Um, really, I think, moved us into a new mode of social media that looks a lot more like the web 1.0, where it was like I grew up on like web forums and, making connections that way through like these niche little spaces where we engage in like, oh, you're a teenager who plays the guitar? Oh, come to ultimateguitar.com and, post what it was that sort of stuff. You had your hobbyist forums. Well, now I think Discord is a real space for that where you can connect to channels that deal with anything under the sun, communities around YouTube personalities. So it's like, oh, hey, I watch a lot of this person's channel and video, and I want to talk to other people who do the same thing. You can join those. If you play video games, developers have their own discords. And, we sort of did this, we stepped into that same space, right? Just to say, like, in the absence of a safe, community space for educators on social media, like maybe ours can sort of be a repository for folks who have like a progressive bent on that. Um, and it has been a hard slog because we've also found that, teachers are burned out. I myself, I don't want to, after looking at screens all day, the last thing I want to do to find community sometimes is go back onto my screen. Like I want to retreat with a book or with something else and disengage that way. But we found we have a really solid core group who they live on the Discord and in other Discord servers too, who they promote events. We watch a lot of like YouTube videos of, we just watched an Alfie Kohn video. We've watched some of HRP's own stuff on there. We've hosted events. Our conference, our annual conference lives on there that we just wrapped up. And we've held some other things on there too. So, it's more than just a place to, I think, to socialize. It's also a place to like, hey, post your book recommendations. I'll post journal articles that I'm reading. I just, posted pictures of my dogs, just we build just a solid community of people engaging around personal stuff, around stuff related to professions, around, other domains connected to education that we want to, do more with. But to your point, it's really about building a community, and communities can do anything. It's not a PLC in the sense that it's like we got to get together twice a week for 45 minutes and talk about standards alignment. Like, no, let's just shoot the breeze and kind of see what comes up. What problems are you facing? Just providing a space, I think, for educators and for people who engage with school systems with a progressive bent who want to get involved to do just that.
Yeah, I like it. It sounds like Discord is the way to go. Like I think the problem with the Mighty Network is that like we could post stuff and that would appear on everyone's feed and we could, make it appear in people's inboxes, but then when they would post, it was just not heard by anybody.
Mm.
It wasn't equal in that way. But it sounds like Discord is more like egalitarian.
Yeah, one of the decisions to do that was like, well, of course, like the reason why Twitter worked when it did is because everyone was freaking on Twitter.
Yeah.
Like it's a space where everyone already is. There wasn't an additional like barrier for participation.
Yeah.
Everybody has a Twitter account. This pocket of people is going to be talking about education stuff. We had a Slack for a moment too that just it eventually just died because there wasn't participation. And Discord seems to be a space where like people are at, especially younger generations of people. I know when I was classroom teaching, students would see the little icon on my computer and be like, Covington, you have a Discord? And I'd be like, yeah, like everybody has a Discord. It used to just be for like gamers and stuff. And now I think it's a pretty mainstream thing. I'm almost 40 years old and I use Discord for 8 hours a day for work. So, it's not just for Zoomers anymore, I
Yeah,
suppose.
yeah, yeah. Really interesting. Thank you for that. You've encouraged me to dive in and get involved. Um, Thank you very much. Right, so we've got about 15 minutes, I reckon, to wrap up, if we may.
Right
Um,
on.
I've got some questions that I tend to ask each of my guests, each of our guests. And it's essentially there's like what's a really good thing, right? So first of all, positive, something that you think, because often these conversations about rethinking education can focus on the problems, as we've touched upon
Yeah.
many of them today. Let's just like boost the signal of something that you really like the look of that's happening wherever that might be, something that we haven't mentioned perhaps today. I'll give you a minute to think about that.
Okay.
There's also um, the major challenge. What do you think is the major challenge that we need to address? And that could be educational, it could be however you wish to interpret that. And then the
Okay.
final one is, what do you think we need to do to address that challenge?
Okay.
So three biggies. So first of all, the positive, something that you like the look of,
Yeah.
that you would like to shine a light on.
So we had our fourth annual Conference to Restore Humanity last week, um, which again, our first one was in 2022. I assure you, we thought it was one and done. And then there was a need for it. So we did it the next year, the next year, the next. So that's just a wild thing to be able to say. But I think it was our most successful one yet, in part because of the incredible, group of participants and leaders that we get to contribute to that community again.
Is this
And
physical or online or a bit of both?
it is virtual. It's on
Okay.
our Discord slash Zoom, just because Zoom is able to handle larger numbers of participants. We get 60 people in a Discord chat. It's like not, I don't even think it hosts that many, but Discord, it works really well, James, because you always have that back channel going. Zoom is great for webinars, but where does that chat go when
Yeah,
you're
good
done?
point. Yeah,
It disappears.
yeah,
Well, we were able to jump between the two spaces. And as a moderator, I could just say, hey, let's keep the conversation going in the Discord. And that's exactly what people would do, right? We'd have a space to be like, hey, keep the conversation going for this keynote or this workshop or this panel discussion, in this space. And people even jumped into, we have our own, voice and video chats. People would just jump into there to just restart the conversation. So it provides a really, both in terms of accessibility, for people who, can't or prefer not to engage, through voice to like have a say in what's happening at the conference, but also just to keep that learning going, like to keep it alive and visible. And it's still there. So a week on, people who participated last week can say, oh, what was that link, that book that somebody had? I can go back in the Discord and look at it. But I was really thrilled that we were able to get Dr. Sarah Fine to be like our only flipped keynote this year. Kind of dialed back a lot of the unidirectional stuff, but what we ask for our flipped keynotes is just sort of a recorded thing ahead of time that people have a lot of time then to watch, listen, rewatch, etc., and then bring those questions and observations into a live Q&A. So on our first day, we were actually able to sit down with Sarah Fine for 90 solid minutes and just go through back and forth, have her unpack the things that she talked about in her keynote, ask those important questions. And
amazing.
I
I've
think
not
her
come across
work.
Sarah before. What does Sarah do?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So she co-wrote this. She's a former high-tech high teacher,
All right.
as a lot of awesome people sort of they do their time and then kind of go out into the world, for all of its pros and cons. But she co-wrote a book, I think in 2019, with Jal Mehta from Harvard Graduate School of Education, called In Search of Deeper Learning. And it's a real I'll say it's a great book. It's very dense in terms of like it packs a lot in there, where they do the exact kind of observations that like I live for, in terms of visiting schools, just gather a lot of student focus group, real like ethnography of, the whole cultural and situation here of a cross section of the different kinds of schools in the American ecosystem, right? So they visit like the progressive school, which I think is like a high-tech high school. They go to like the really strict control model. They go to like the really average one and go through all of this. But Sarah's work since then she's been working real closely with these school leaders, particularly in like Southern California, where she works for the University of San Diego, I believe, who are doing really amazing stuff. But her keynote was about what can we learn from the fringes of school. So really differentiating between the core, which is like, your core curriculum, where all of the negative externalities that we're talking about exist, disengagement, boredom, mental health, et cetera. She goes, you don't find those on the fringe, meaning your electives. So, your band, your choir, your student driven clubs, your sports, and all of these where kids are engaged. It's self directed very often, right? Or like kids feel a real sense of belonging in community. So, her whole thesis was like, what can we learn from the fringes? What's the grammar of the core and what's the grammar of the fringe, and how do we make that shift? And how do we make that in like mainstream schools, right? It's like your average typical public school. So she just brought examples from, her observations in Southern California, brought examples from elsewhere in her research, just to be like, this is possible. These different spaces of school are possible. In fact, they exist right now in the places that we don't think about because, we have like I don't know, like a disdain or disrespect for what happens outside of those core areas, but we can really learn a lot. So yeah, I'd recommend just following her. She has an upcoming book with a couple co-authors that's like based on that research. So we got a little bit of a preview of that last week, which was really cool. So I would say that's a good thing in my life, in the world of education, is like there are conscientious, thoughtful, brilliant people like Dr. Sarah Fine doing that work and amplifying, the cool work that's happening on the fringes for all of us to learn from. That's a great one.
Hmm. Thank you
Uh,
very much. Okay, so that was the positive
that was my positive.
challenge.
What's what what could the challenge be in the context of the United States education system? And what do we need to do to resolve it? What can I say on a publicly recorded podcast?
Yeah,
No,
we're living
it's
through some interesting times, let's say.
and I think, God, I think a major challenge. I'll depersonalize it, right? And I'll say like it's not a particular like administration or person, even though it kind of is.
Hmm.
And just say like the biggest challenge that we have to overcome is like I think what do we do to rebuild community and solidarity and uh, get society back to a place where this is just not tolerable, right? Like where these aren't the kinds of things that we in the world can stand for, just because there is so much bad going on in the world. I draw a lot of hope. If I could transition from the major challenge is that everything is really bad right now. um, and it's really hard, I think, to find a light in that darkness. But I don't think we have a whole lot of choice in that, because I don't think that like I can't give up on the world that my kids are going to live in, right? And I think we all have an obligation to make sure that the world as it is right now is not the world that my 10-year-old and my 7-year-old grow up in. I view it absolutely intolerable. And so I draw a lot of wisdom, I think, from other thinkers who are in this direction. Just in the sense of like every day when you want to give up and just lay in bed and scroll on your phone, or doom scroll on your phone, and let the world's atrocities roll over you, to realize like there has to be a better way forward. So I think I'll stop that right now and just say like I think Adrienne Marie Brown's emergent strategy is like HRP's Bible. It's like our
Sorry, could
guiding
you repeat that? I
light.
didn't catch the name or the.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I got it somewhere on my shelf. It's always moving around because I'm always referencing it, so it's never in a consistent place. But Adrienne Marie Brown, and the book is Emergent Strategy. And I think what's really powerful about learning from people like her, I mean, yes, she's an educator, but I think she also, she's served in a lot of different positions as an organizer, an activist, as a like a doula, working in like birthing and sexual advocacies as well, which is just incredible. But I think learning that like the way that the world is right now isn't the way that it has to be, similar to that core versus the fringe,
Hmm.
and thinking ecologically, which is really what emergent strategy is about, to say
Right.
like those small things that you think don't really matter, they compound fractally throughout the system. So if in emergent strategy, the small is the reflection of the large, like the positive interaction that I have with my kids, right? To like make sure that they grew up as happy and healthy people, right? That spirals throughout systems too. The single good thing that I'm able to do over here, the one positive way that I'm able to contribute to this cause has a chain reaction through systems as well. So it's the idea that we actively build the world that we want to inhabit through our actions every single day. And on the flip side of that, a lot of really awful, evil people are also, building a world intentionally every single day, in oftentimes in big ways. But I don't think we have much of a choice but to, again, let that chain reaction just build through our own actions every day. The other book I read ahead of Conference to Restore Humanity, again, to try and find that light in the darkness, was Let This Radicalize You by Kelly Hayes and Mariame Kaba, who again are educators, but it's not like an education book. They're primarily organizers and activists who connect to this notion of world building and imagination every day. Like the battle for the future is not just fought in what we can accomplish in practical terms, but it's envisioning that world, right? Like, how do we imagine the world as a better and different place? And then practically, how do we organize and how do we build the capacity to actually turn that vision into a reality? I think they're two just great thinkers in again, thinking about the work we do in education and its connection to society as like fundamentally a world building project. And how do we engage in that in positive, happy, healthy ways, knowing that the work is really hard, and that the world is bad and there's a lot of forces pitted against it, but knowing that every single day, like you matter, your survival matters, and those actions that you take fundamentally like are acts of resistance. Anything that you do in defiance of the void, is an act
Right.
of is an act of resistance. So.
Absolutely. And it loops back to what you were talking about earlier, Nick, quite nicely, I think, about like school as being the microcosm of the greater thing. And I think that for me, it comes back to agency, like, and the stuff that you were talking about, that like when young people have had the opportunity to experience, and I like how much you place the importance on experiential learning in the work that you're doing, actually learning by like living it, by feeling it, and like, in the way that Kate was talking about, like knowing about the experience of building that chicken hut. It's not about whether the door was big enough for the chicken to go through. The point of that is that the kid gets to find out that actually you really do mean it when you say like you're going to do this thing and I'm not going to micromanage you and it's over to you. And the kid starts to practice having agency, and then when they go out into that wider world, they can carry that forward. And I think that like part of the problem that we face is just one of apathy, like you just described it, like the doom scrolling, the tendency to just close the curtains and pull the duvet over your head, and the news is just too grim, so I'm not even going to watch it, because then I somehow protect myself from the pain of having to see these horrendous images that we're seeing all the time. And I think that is the flickering little candle of hope, right? That like if we can nurture that sense that people have, that they are able to exert some sort of influence on the world, right? And to not just be sort of beaten by it, to be beaten by these bad actors.
Can I sort of intervene here with a wonderful quote from John Dewey that I encountered this fall? Dewey was also really prolific in his writing throughout the 1930s, in his own time of fascism, right? Like reflecting on the future of America and the future of the world, and what's the role of education in this. And I think, we have a lot to learn from him on that. But he co-wrote this awesome, it's a little small piece. I think it appeared in like a little pamphlet that he was running in his 70s here alongside a bunch of colleagues. Another dude at Columbia called Goodwin Watson. He's got an interesting history in his own right. But they co-wrote The Forward View, which I think is like the role of a free teacher in a free society, like reflecting on the spread of fascism and education's role in this. And there's just a real great quote that I opened our conference to restore humanity with last week, and that has just been resonating with me ever since. But he says, If there be any teachers who chose this profession because they imagined that in it they might stand securely aside from the turmoil of battle for power, they'll probably find the next decade or several decades very dismaying. A free education is incompatible with fascism. Education is likely to be one of the great battlegrounds upon which is waged an intense and desperate struggle for power. What we do today in revising a curriculum, studying psychology, preparing a lesson, educating a teacher, addressing a group of parents, or passing a resolution in our organization of teachers will take us a little nearer to or remove us further from the practices which have here been envisioned for a free teacher in a free society. And I think it's remarkable to put John Dewey 100 years ago in dialogue with Adrienne Marie Brown and Mariame Kaba today, right, writing on those things because they're speaking to that same right fundamental emergence, that fractal nature. That like what you do in the classroom every day matters a lot in the scheme of the world, and what you do in society every day matters a lot. And we have a lot of in a time where we can feel really powerless and without agency and without a lot of hope, I think we can take solace in the fact that like within our tiny locus of control, however small or large that might be, we can affect really big change just a small bit at a time. And yeah, I hope maybe listeners and yourselves get a lot as much inspiration, from hearing that threaded across 100 years of history as I would.
Yeah, man. Thank you for that. Wow, what a beautiful, stirring little quote to wrap things up on. Kate, do you have any final questions, comments, reflections?
Don't think I can top that. No,
That's a pretty final bookend, huh?
I
Yes.
think, yeah, and it's true. And this has been really affirming for me, because sometimes, even after all these years of doing this work, I think, the number of people who ask me, is that really the most important thing you can be doing right now? Teaching children how to breathe in and out, and how to feel better, and how to manage their own nervous system. And I go home and I think, yeah, I think this is the most important work that I can be doing, is
It
to
is.
teach children the skill of knowing that if they don't like the way that they're feeling right now, they have the power to do something about it. And therefore, if they don't like the dynamic of a relationship, they have the power to do something about it. If they don't like the way that they feel about something in their environment, they have the power to do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I think that probably is some of the most important stuff I can be doing. Just listening to you talking about all of this. That's where it stems from. That's what makes it human-centered. It's the human being inside the relationships and how they deal with them that makes the difference.
And I think too, just again, connecting that the work that we engage with at schools to the greater project of humanity, right? That doesn't happen in a bubble. It's not like the learning stops or starts at the schoolhouse door or anything else. Like you're building human kids that are contributing to a human society and civilization. You're right. That was there before us and that will be here after us, right? But we can play a really important part in a single kid's life. That's going to make all the difference for something, down the line. I think we have to have that hope, right? Or else the whole project falls apart without that. Like hope as a platform for action. You can act, all you want. You can be busy, but I think if you lack that fundamental hope, you're not going to be intentional about the work that you're doing. So really taking a step back and reconnecting yourself with that, I think, is really important.
Yeah, thank you. And just as a final note, if I may, on that intentional thing, one of the things that I really like about you is how regularly and how sort of like unapologetically you use the word progressive education, or the phrase progressive education, which has become like a swear word in some corners of the world, as I'm sure that you've noticed in recent years. I think the neo-traditional crowd have done quite an effective job at sort of portraying progressivism as this sort of just a completely misconceived set of woolly-minded, wrong-headed, just a mess, and that there's no value in it, and that it's just not even that even to go near it is to be be put at fear of being ridiculed, and it's become very sort of heightened. But speaking with yourself, and also I recall when I mentioned Ron Berger earlier, he describes himself just very plainly, just like, I work in the progressive tradition, and here's why I do that, and here's why I think that it's better to be a progressive educator than to be a traditionalist educator. And of course, there are ideas in both, right, that are useful, and it's not this sort of like who's going to win. You don't have to pick a side, and it's a football game, and there's one set of winners and losers. Of course, it's much more about having a blend of ideas. And like we said earlier, you know, there are occasions when explicit instruction is the most effective thing that you could be doing at that point in time, and there are also other educational goals that require you to let the kids loose and to see what they can do under their own steam. And so I think that it's just very, very revivifying and really lovely and energizing to connect with you, Nick, and to hear about your amazing work. And thank you very much for sharing your time with us this afternoon.
Oh, always, guys, a pleasure. And Kate, I mean, such a pleasure for us to reconnect. I'll have you on the HRP pod, so I'll reach out after this and we can get that arranged.
My pleasure.
Yeah, and again, if there's anybody out there, any prospective PhD candidates who like the sound of the PhD stands for palm trees, hammocks, and
drinks on the beach,
then you know to drop Kate a line. And so we started. I'm going to wrap up because we started with Ozzy Osbourne. I'm off to an Elvis night this evening, and
oh, excellent!
Very soon. So I need to go and oil my quiff.
Yeah, you gotta get the duckbill going on there.
Yeah, exactly.
Gotta throw on your blue suede shoes.
Exactly. Yes. So cheers, Nick. Thank you so much. It's been really great to spend some time with you, and I look forward to continuing. I feel like our conversation needs to continue and deepen, and these international connections are very important to nourish and to cross-pollinate ideas. And there's so much really interesting stuff that I feel like I still have to learn from you. So let's keep the conversation going.
Oh my gosh, I appreciate that, James. Of course, we will.